In this chapter, we will focus on the evaluation process and the 4 steps after the design has been developed. The first step is conducting the data collection. The second step is analyzing the data. The third step is reporting the findings, and the fourth step is disseminating the information. Conducting the data collection has 5 steps to ensure that it is collected accurately and appropriately. The first thing that should be done is to obtain necessary clearances and permissions. Typically, school systems have set procedures to collect this from students and teachers, often requiring parental permission. It is always helpful to provide participants with information on how the data will be used. Provide participants with incentives to take the time to participate in your study. Next, take into account the need and sensitivities of the respondents. It is always important to consider the needs of the participants. Being a part of an evaluation can be very threatening, and they should be told clearly and honestly why the data is being recorded and how the results will be used. Most participants in data collection are kept anonymous. However, there are instances where the identity of the participant is difficult to keep. In these cases, it is important to obtain consent from the participants. Thirdly, those conducting research evaluations must be carefully trained to be objective and unbiased. It is important to be fully aware of the culture and the rules of the community they are interacting with. Appropriate training also warns data collectors from actions that may lead to these biased results. This can be difficult when data collectors are closely connected to the research that they are conducting. The fourth step is to collect data from as many members of the sample population as possible. The more data collected, the better the evaluation results. The goal is to achieve 70% feedback to gather high-quality results. An often ignored group are those who have dropped out of the study along the way. Follow up on these ex-participants, providing a fuller picture of the impacts of the treatment group, as well as the assessment of the impacts of those dropping out. Lastly, the data collector should be sure to cause as little disruption as possible, meaning that the data collector should be sensitive to the schedules and time constraints of its participants. Now let's take a look at analyzing the data in these 4 steps. The first step is checking the raw data to prepare for analysis. The very first step when examining raw data is to eliminate data that seems unlikely or out of line. After, prepare the data for computer analysis. Step 2. Use the evaluation plan to conduct the initial analysis. It is important to be careful when choosing data analysis techniques. Using the wrong technique can invalidate the whole evaluation project. Technology and advanced programs have made issues like this easier to avoid. The third step is to conduct additional analysis based on initial results. Sometimes the additional analysis may raise more questions, and you must find answers to these questions. If, for example, the first analysis looked at overall teacher performance, a second analysis might subdivide the total group into subunits of a particular interest. For example, more experienced teachers versus less experienced teachers. Sometimes situations like this provide the most interesting data collection. Finally, it is time to present the results of the varied analyses, to integrate and separate analyses into an overall picture, and to develop conclusions regarding what the data shows. There are situations where the finding becomes challenging because the data sources did not yield consistent findings. Occasionally, the findings must stand as they are, unresolved and hopefully thought-provoking. Now we move on to reporting these findings. Formal reports developed by evaluators typically include 6 major sections. The background section describes the overview, participants, scope, and constraints of a project. Secondly, an evaluation is based on the need for specific information, and this section describes the questions that the study addressed, as well as points out the questions that could not be addressed due to certain circumstances. The third step is evaluation procedures. This section of the report describes the groups that participated in the evaluation study and discusses how the particular populations were chosen. If comparison groups were included in the evaluation, it is important to indicate the equivalence or explain how the problem of imperfect equivalence was addressed. This section also describes the type of data collected and how it was collected. Oftentimes, it also includes a matrix or a table that summarizes the evaluation and data collection process, as well as the results at the end of this section. Step 5 is findings. This section presents the results of an analysis and is organized in terms of each question. It is important to point out positive and negative answers to any of the evaluation questions. Using visuals like tables and graphs are suggested. Make sure limitations that affect validity are discussed. At the end of this section, be sure to include a summary that represents the major conclusions. Step 6 is the conclusion. The conclusion section reports the findings with more broad-based and summative elements. The statements must connect to the findings of the evaluation questions and goals of the program. Occasionally, the conclusion also includes recommendations for others conducting similar projects. Be sure that recommendations are based on data and not other factors. In addition to the 6 major sections of a formal report, they might also include other sections, for example, an abstract or an executive summary. Disseminating the information is the final stage in project evaluation. Planning for disseminating begins early in the development of a project. It is helpful to make a list of audiences with whom you want to share these findings with. This may be similar to the stakeholders of the group and might include a funding source, potential funding resources, others involved with similar projects or areas of research, community members, especially those who are directly involved, and members of a business or political community. When developing a dissemination approach, consider these 2 questions. What does your various audience need to know? And what is the best manner to communicate the information to them? It is important to share results with stakeholders to help understand what the results mean for them and what they can use this information for. Present only information that is practical and avoid technical and confusing language. If the evaluation is successful, you should have a product to share, such as a module for instruction. While most of the time the idea of dissemination is usually associated with projects that were successful, it is important to share results from projects that the results ultimately did not support the initial hypothesis. Sharing this knowledge can be useful to both colleagues and stakeholders in the research world. This is a copy of Exhibit 12 from the text on page 49. It is an outline for the formal report. All information was derived from the sources below, and the video was made for educational purposes only. The presentation, research, and materials was made jointly by me, Anastasia Ames, Darby Martin, and Samantha King. Now we want to know what you think. At what point during the evaluation process is it too late to decide what information is disseminated to the stakeholders? In your opinion, why is the information of the participants who have dropped out just as important as voluntary participants? You can find a detailed transcript of this presentation attached to the discussion forum with this video. Thank you. We look forward to discussing this with the class.